And the second part to the question was how I got started with poetry, which was, so my best friend in the entire world, Laurie Slade, who is a writer and a poet himself. He actually recently did a play in Scotland in a festival called Up in the Hills with Ian McKellen, actually. So Laurie Slade, sorry, I just want to give massive, massive thanks to him, because without him, basically, I wouldn't be doing any of this, essentially, because he brought me as a present a one-day, it was like a one-day course at Faber Academy that you can do. It goes on from like 9 a.m. to like 5 p.m. or something like that. And there's like 2 very, very short breaks. But other than that, it's like quite an intensive like poetry day with Richard Scott, who's an amazing poet. Is a published poet by Faber. And I recommend his books, Soho and Soho's a very good book. And he's Crystalline. I forgot the title of the second book. Actually, wait. If you give me a second, I can find out the title of the second book.
Okay, no problem. In fact, I'm just gonna pause for 2 seconds.
Richard Scott, a poet who wrote 2 very good poetry books, Soho and That Broke into Shining Crystals. Very good books, and he was a very good teacher. And then I just immediately started going into poetry, started writing every day, started reading out my poems to Laurie, and it was just such a great experience that he brought me it's like a 5-month poetry course or something like that. It was a very, very like longer course that he got me. At the same thing, this one was with Richard Scott and Rachel Long, and it was just such a great time. I learned so much about poetry, just a lot about the art of poetry. I connected with other people there who were interested in poetry, and Faber, they really had just great resources as well. They really gave you enough to, when you go out into the world, they gave you this big sheet of places to submit to and stuff like that. So it was fantastic, really. And then after that, I, got the itch to perform, and so I looked up where poetry jams were in London, and I didn't know this yet, but there are in fact like 5 poetry jams on a night in London, and the first one I ever went to was Morocco Bound Bookstores LGBTQ night, which I recommend. S-Bars runs a really, really great night. It's fantastic, and I loved it. My first performance was probably very, very bad. It makes me cringe thinking about it. I think I read like 5 poems or something like that. Probably very, very fast and very, very stage hoggy. But I would like to think that over time my performance has gotten tighter and better, and in the course of about nearly I'd say 2 years, I think 2 years now that I've been doing this. It's coming up to 2 years. And I've been doing at least so it started off as one every month, then one every couple of weeks, then one every week, and now it's like 2 a week, and then now it's 2 or 3 a week. So now I'm really, I'm getting in my practice, and so I think I'm really sort of honing it in and getting a getting a style down and my delivery down. And in that time, I've had 20-minute sets, and I'm starting to get my headline sets in as well. And I've done headline sets now at Otherword and Poetry Shack and other places too. So that's my poetry career, as it were.
Good career, and soon, in a couple of weeks, it'll be, well, just over 3 weeks. It'll be Crunch as well. So,
Yes, I'm excited.
yeah, so are we. I'm really glad that you can make it. So what does your writing process look like? Do you write every day, or does it come in bursts, or?
So I write at night. That's usually quite important. I don't write during the day. It's always and it's not at 10 o'clock. It's at I'm talking at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. I mean dead night, I am in a weekly Zoom call with so there's a the most reliable weekly writing I do is there's an American poet called Neil Hilburn who runs a writer's workshop, and it's technically it's every Wednesday in America, but because it's on American time, it's on Thursday, 1 a.m. for me, something like that, and it runs to 3 a.m. And we write 2 poems under a theme with lots of prompts, and we get lots of poems to go with it. So that's the most reliable weekly poem writing that I do. Otherwise, how I write myself is I will get an idea sometimes. I will maybe write down loose lines in my phone, and then when it's the dead of night or something like that, I will try to craft something around that. Or I will just wait until it's really, really late and then go, right, it's now poem writing time, and that is my designated slot. Because I don't know why it is, but for some reason daytime just doesn't work for my brain for writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite odd that way. I don't think it's quite healthy either. But the sunlight just doesn't work for my tendencies for poetry.
I like the phrase. It's poem writing time. That flashes up in front of you, and then you're in. Do you find that your neurodiversity, does it affect your poem? Does it inform it? Does it influence your poetry and your life in general, or is there a split in between that? Or
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think everything does, because all of our experiences make us, and we wouldn't be the people that we are with the experiences we are writing what we write if we didn't have the previous experiences that we did. So, there might be a Stevie in an alternate universe who doesn't have OCD but still does poetry, and I think his poetry would be completely different. His poetry, for example, wouldn't have lots of weird references to the number 4 hidden throughout it. That only is in there for him. He wouldn't write poems like The Disappearing Man that I mentioned earlier, or other epilepsy-based poems. Also, where intersectionality applies, my queerness relates to this in that I am a queer poet as well, and so that also gets added to the pot. And so all of these experiences, so I am a queer epileptic, OCD poet, and so all of that is my life experience, and I draw on my life experience for my poetry, and so those are the poems that come out of my life experience, and I can't draw on anyone else's life experience, so that's uniquely my voice that I have to give, and I can't write with anyone else's voice. So bits of, even if I'm doing it intentionally by putting references to things about my OCD, or even it could just show up randomly, just because it's a part of me, and because those parts just show up sometimes because they are me, but they will sometimes creep in. So I think it's inevitable, really. I think it's almost impossible to be who you are in any sense, and not have it creep into your poetry. I think it would be very hard to pretend to be someone else and write, and it's still not creep in, even if you were writing as a character.
And you mentioned that, you started performing. Is there any difference when you're writing for something you know is going to be performed live rather than something which is going to stay on the page? Does that make any difference for you?
Yes, they're longer. The longer, usually punchier. Although I will say I try not to make that distinction. When I'm writing, I try not to think, oh, this is going to make a good live poem, or this is going to make a good written poem. I try usually to think this will just make a good poem, and then see how it sounds afterwards. Though I think I know now that if it's something that's short and has, then that depends more on form, then that's probably more for the page. And if it's something that's, a long confessional diatribe, then that's more something that's for the stage.
Do you feel that working through poetry or poetry in general, has it helped you understand, or has it given you insight into your own neurodiversity and so on? Is that something which comes up, or is it just not really on the table?
Yeah, I would say it has. I would say that sometimes poetry can really put you in a mood if you're really, in quite a bad mood, it can change your mood. Um, and you can end up writing something that you wouldn't have expected, and you can then look back at it and think, oh wow, so that was what I was thinking at that time, and that was informed by that, and I can totally see how that, even though it's not an epilepsy poem, since it's not about epilepsy, it was informed about me thinking about epilepsy. When I write poetry, all of my drafts have brackets on them that say, um, a sentence saying, was written after I ate a sandwich, or was written after I was upset after something happened, blah, blah, blah. So it has a general feeling of my mood. So I can go back and see what my general mood was when making the poem, and that helps with editing the poem as well. But you'd be surprised sometimes of what kind of moods you were when you're in the poem. So I guess what I'm saying is sometimes it helps you work through emotions that you didn't know were there, really.
And when you look back, you can understand what you were feeling better than when you were in the moment.
Yes, exactly.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. That's a very interesting thing to say, and I think it does. I like the idea of after having a sandwich. I like that the idea that that could be a big impact on how you're feeling and how you're writing poetry. But I can relate to that, and I think that sometimes it's only when you look back that you really see what was going through your mind at a particular point, and that can not just a week ago, that can be years ago. You can really see what's going on. I'd like to chat a little bit about London and the spoken word culture there, because as you've mentioned, you're around and about doing a lot, very busy on the scene. What do you think of the scene in general? And do you think, has the city and the scene itself, has it shaped your work at all?
It's definitely shaped my work. I have a poem at the moment called This Ugly City that
Mm-hmm.
I've been performing. That's about London, and that's about how I love and hate London, and it's got a lot of good reception. I'll be performing it in my set for Crunch, and it pretty much sums up what I love about London, which is that for all of its griminess and terribleness and the ways in which it seems to try to keep us down, uh, something does seem to flourish out of it. And one of those things I feel is the poetry scene, that it's so gorgeous and vibrant. And as I said, slightly jokingly earlier, oh, there's 5 poetry gigs on a night. There really is. There's like, if you go to like where the words are, or Pulse Poetry on Instagram, those pages that collect all of the poetry nights into one, that go on a month into one page. They're such helpful resources, and the people who run them, bless them so much, because they're such amazing resources. But it's so lovely to see that there's just a wonderful community that's there just for sharing words. Like, that's all they want to do, is they just want to hear other people's words and share with. Like, sometimes people go to poetry jams just, and they don't even want to speak, they just want to hear other people say personal things, and I think that's so wonderful. It's so beautiful in a way. I don't even mean in a way, I just think it's so beautiful. What could be more amazing or personal, really, than that? Of wanting to just bask in the language of complete strangers. I think it's completely wonderful. And I think London has that specifically. It's such like a wonderful poetry scene where there's so much going on, and there's so many key figures as well, and you'll always keep finding them. You'll, like, if you get involved in the London poetry scene, you'll always find another figure that you like. You'll find someone amazing that you love every time you go to a poetry jam, or someone who's just starting out who will end up becoming someone amazing that you love later on. And there's so many friends to be made. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous scene that I can't say enough about. It's really, really great. Yeah, and there's so much just great art going on, like, that you only see. What I love about it is there's so much great art that sometimes you will only see for that one time, and then it's gone. We're living in such a world where everything, I feel, has to be captured by cameras and there forever, and there's so much permanence to everything. Everything is always being captured, 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 and there's something quite beautiful that about, sometimes someone will say, I don't want to be recorded. Um, and they'll say something utterly beautiful, and then maybe they'll just go and you'll never hear them again, and it'll be like a, a ghost or something. I remember, because you've mentioned it briefly, but I sometimes host my own poetry jams for charity, Hackney Night Shelter. But I did did one a couple months ago, and this guy who I'd never seen before, he came in, did this gorgeous poem about Mary Magdalene. Um, it was like it blew the house down, and I've never seen him since. So it's almost like he came in as a ghost and just kind of did this poem and then left. And it's like brilliant. It's like this amazing temporary art that just lives on in our minds. Um, so yeah, sometimes you just get beautiful moments like that as well, like these gorgeous, beautiful moments.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. I was going to ask. I was going to ask about the Hackney night shelter nights. That's my next question after this one. In fact, so I'd like to know more about that. Um, I was going to ask about in on the neurodiversity tip. Do you think the poetry space? I mean, you've talked a lot about the community, and I think that's really one of the strongest things about the London scene is this sense of community as well. But do you think it's a space? Is it open to neurodiverse voices and different ways of thinking? Is there still work to be done there, or is that what do you think?
Oh, I think it's totally open to people. I think, one of the things that's great about the space is that, when there's always a preamble at the beginning of every poetry jam that makes it clear that, hey, this is for everyone. And I think it's really, really comforting that, yes, it is for everyone. And I've never been at a poetry jam, and I've been to a lot of them now. I've never been to one where I've been made to feel uncomfortable, or at least where I've been made to feel that if I had a problem, I could raise a hand or an issue, and something wouldn't be done about it. But I haven't needed to anyway, because nothing's ever happened. People don't generally go to poetry jams to say nasty things. The general golden rule of poetry jams is don't be a dick. But I've never met a dick in a poetry jam. So it's really a good place to express yourself as a neurodiverse person, because everyone is really accepting to hearing other voices. And everyone actually, because it's poetry and people want to hear different stuff and they want to hear new stuff, people want to hear that. So it's actually really encouraging of neurodiverse voices, because people want to hear what another voice thinks, what another different brain thinks or feels about a certain issue. So I feel like it really is accepting in that regard.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space to be in, I think, in that sense. I'd like to ask you about the Hackney Night Shelter as well. And you've mentioned it before, and you mentioned the events you do. I think it's really great work. Um, Tell us a little bit about it, and how did you come to do it, and what does it mean for you? Why is it important, and so on?
So I volunteer regularly for Hackney Night Shelter, which is a night shelter for the homeless in Hackney. And I was essentially and I've put on events before to raise money. I put on a drag bingo event to raise money. I've put on a couple of different bits. But then when I started doing poetry, I was asked if I wanted to do like a poetry jam type thing. And I thought, yeah, that would be quite cool. So last year we did the first one, and it was an utter success. It was really, really great. The first one we did raised over £1,000. Actually, it was that successful, because of a late poet donated £600 to it, which pushed us over. Um, and so it was that great, and people loved it that much. They loved the space, which is Stoke Newington Bookshop, who I really want to shout out Stoke Newington Bookshop as well, because they've always been nothing but kind and brilliant hosts, and always been great for when we've gone over time. But yeah, so it was a the first one went so well at Stoke Newington Bookshop that I decided that I would make it a seasonal thing, so that every 4 months I could raise more money, because I thought that maybe ask in these times, asking people for money every month maybe isn't realistic. But I think asking people, to pay a ticket and then to give a little bit on top of that maybe for charity every 4 months is a little bit more realistic. For a fundraiser. So I think every 4 months is a good bet. So we've done it now 3 times, and the next time will be in around May or June. I haven't decided yet, but it'll probably be a summer type jam. And I'm very, very excited for that. That'll be cool. And yeah, they get sold out very, very quick now, standing room only. And the last time the tickets were half sold out a couple of days after they went up. It was crazy. And the store was, it was bursting full. And we've had some great, great poets do some sets for us and do some headlining sets for us. And we've had some really we've had those great moments as well, which is what I'm really proud of. Those great moments that just kind of happen once, which is fantastic as well. Some really, really lovely stuff there. One of my favourite moments was we had a guy who was, we've had a couple of poets who were previously homeless perform, and it just felt so lovely to kind of have that kind of full circle moment happen there. And it was kind of really, really lovely. So yeah, please, put this in to look up Hackney Night Shelter on Instagram and Stevie Poems on Instagram, and whenever one is going to happen, to visit it, because I will post about it and let people know, and it's always a great time.
Yeah, we'll put all the handles in the interview thing, and also in the magazine as well. Yeah, it's beautiful, and it's beautiful to see people coming back to the scene as well. You mentioned people who are homeless, and then they're coming back to perform. I'd like to, just because of time, I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions now, but we could talk about that all day. I think the homeless shelter work and the event there is really amazing work. You mentioned your set at Crunch, so you mentioned a couple of poems, and I wanted to ask you specifically about The Disappearing Man, because I think that's a really interesting title and an interesting concept, and I think I'm going to let you talk about it, but it sounds to me it links with a lot of issues which are around neurodiversity. But could you tell us about that, and anything else you want to say about your set as well, if you like?
So that poem in particular is about my epilepsy. It's very explicitly about my epilepsy. The first line of it is "seizures are sound." So, and it goes through a couple of metaphors about what epilepsy is. I talk about epilepsy being like a bad art gallery, like being in a bad club, but also the most prominent metaphor I use is about sort of like a magic show, and about performing a trick, the disappearing man, and the idea of making your memories kind of just disappear, which is how I feel epilepsy is it's kind of like blank spots that kind of pop up. It's really, really hard to explain epilepsy if you haven't had a seizure, but it's like, yeah, your memory just kind of, without warning, just like snaps. It's just gone. It's like such a bizarre, surreal journey. It is almost like, it's terrible, It's awful, and I would never wish it on my worst enemy, but it is like magic. It's like a horrible, terrible, hideous magic that happens where you're just gone and you don't know why, you're just in this blank space. And that's what I tried to get across with this poem.
So it's that's interesting. It's the idea of internal disappearance as well as external, and it's when you say your memory goes. So you're aware when you're having a seizure. You're aware. You're still aware. You haven't blacked out as such, and but you just have no concept. Is that right? Am I getting that right? You have no concept of who you are or your memory and so on.
No, it's more that it's nothing. I have nothing, and then I wake up, and then it's a lot of people yelling at me and telling me weird things, but I don't understand it. So people will say, "How many fingers am I?" This is all in the poems. People will say, "How many fingers am I holding up? Can you stand up?" But it's really, really hard to understand what they're saying, and it's because my brain has just started again. It's really, really fuzzy and like awkward and hard to interact with that. So it's like the 5 fingers maybe. It's really because you're like just kind of resetting. It's like a computer rebooting. It's very, very odd, and it's a I even though I've had a couple, well, not a couple, even though I've had a good amount of them, you know, um, they're still the most confusing things I've ever had, and they're always the most distressing things I've ever had, because it's just like this, like it's almost like impossible to describe it without poetry, but it's like blanking out with series of people yelling at you, and then eventually you end up in hospital and then in pain, with like splats of memory gone, and you don't know why it happened, and there's no reason why it happened.
Thanks for talking about that. I mean, that's the absolute core of what this poetry event and this kind of thing. It's so interesting you say it's impossible to describe without poetry. I often think that artists are very much like that. Like if I could tell you what it was, I wouldn't make art, you know. But poetry
Yeah,
steps in,
exactly.
and poetry can step in and like it can fill in blanks of feeling rather than just describing to someone. But I think you saying something like that is really that's the kind of empathy which people need to build so that they know they can understand better what other people are going through. Um, I would I want to ask you just before we finish. Going to finish in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to ask you for someone who might be neurodiverse and thinking about writing or performing poetry. What would you say to them?
Oh, I would say just even if no one else sees it but you, do it just to see what happens. Just write something, anything, just a little thing, just a couple of lines, just to see what's in your brain. Because you might be surprised, and you don't have to even show anyone or tell anyone. It can be in a diary that you keep to yourself, and you know, and no one ever sees, or it can be something that you write and show your lover, and that's the only person who ever sees it. Or you can write a grand thing and you can go out performing it if you want to. But I would say give it a try, give poetry a try, because there's definitely something on your mind that you don't know until you've started writing it down. And if you're worried that it's not going to be quite good, you would be surprised. You honestly would be surprised.
Thanks. That's a really beautiful answer. So, so what's next for you then, Stevie? What have you got coming up?
What have I got coming up? More poetry, more writing, and more performances. I've been headlining a lot of gigs this year, and I hope to do a lot more. So I'm rolling on with that.
Any plans on publication?
I am going to start submitting to them soon, and maybe have some ideas of self-publicating, like a pamphlet or something like that, maybe this year. So we'll see. Maybe at least something of my own.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I'd like to. It'll be good to see what your stuff. I've seen your sketchbook, your notebook where you write your poetry. It's quite an interesting artifact in itself, I think. But it'll be nice to see it on the page and to see what you come up with for a publication. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Anything else I'd like to say? Be kind and empathetic. There you go. That's my quote. Be kind and empathetic.
That's a great quote to end on. Stevie, thanks very much for making the time talking to us, and especially talking to us so openly and really going there with a few of these topics. We could have talked about this a lot more. Maybe we should do a podcast or something about this, because we could talk about it for a long time, I think. I'm really looking forward to having you perform on the 29th and seeing what your work does on that day, and the Disappearing Man and everything else you've mentioned. So I'll see you then, and thanks very much.
Thank you.